Welcome, fellow explorers of the unknown. You've just stepped into a world of forbidden knowledge, ancient mysteries, and stories that have lingered through time waiting for someone like you to uncover them. I'm Twilight Tales, and in today's journey, we're diving deep into the shadows of history where secrets lie buried and untold stories beg to be revealed. If you're someone who's driven by curiosity, if you've ever wondered what might lurk behind the veil of ancient empires, or been captivated by the unknown, then you're in the right place. So, settle in, turn down the lights, and prepare yourself for a night of stories that will make you question what you thought you knew. This is only the beginning. Let's get started. The fall of Rome is a story etched in the annals of history, one of decadence, decline, and eventual collapse. It was a world once known for its unmatched power, a civilization that spanned continents, its reach felt from the windswept deserts of Africa to the rolling hills of Britain. Yet, as the great Roman Empire fractured, it wasn't the end of an empire that had ruled for centuries. It was the beginning of something even more enigmatic, a civilization that would live on in the shadows of its former glory, known as the Byzantine Empire. The year 476 AD marks the official end of the Western Roman Empire, when Romulus Augustulus, the last Roman emperor in the West, was deposed by the barbarian chieftain Odoacer. The fall of Rome was not a singular, catastrophic event, but rather a slow, unraveling decades of political instability, economic decay, and military weakness. The Eastern Roman Empire, however, was different. While the West was consumed by turmoil, the East, centered around Constantinople, remained intact. It was a world apart, yet intricately connected to the legacy of Rome. This is where the Byzantines began. Byzantium, as it was known before it became Constantinople, stood at the crossroads of East and West, a strategic city whose fate would shape the future of an entire empire. When Emperor Constantine I moved the Roman capital from Rome to Byzantium in 330 AD, he saw beyond the decaying grandeur of the West. He built a new Roman Empire, not just in a different location, but with a different vision. The Eastern Roman Empire, later called the Byzantine Empire, was marked by an intricate fusion of Roman law, Greek culture, and Christian faith. It wasn't merely a continuation of Rome, it was a reinvention, a world reshaped by the needs of survival and power. But why did the Eastern Empire survive when the West faltered? The answer lies not in the glory of its past, but in the pragmatic decisions made to ensure its survival. As Rome crumbled, the Byzantines faced constant threats, barbarian invasions, internal dissent, and a changing world order that demanded adaptation. They understood early on that survival required flexibility, and it was through these very pressures that some of the Byzantine Empire's most peculiar customs were born. What we often think of as eccentricities or luxuries were, in fact, the result of harsh political realities. Take, for example, the imperial court. While the Western Empire collapsed under the weight of its own internal corruption, the Byzantine court evolved into a highly structured, almost ritualistic institution. Every movement, every gesture was loaded with meaning. The emperor was not just a ruler, he was the embodiment of divine will, a living symbol of both Roman authority and Christian grace. This wasn't the result of vanity, it was a carefully constructed facade that ensured control over an empire under siege. The imperial court's elaborate customs and grand ceremonies were designed not to flaunt power, but to project it, to reassure the people that their rulers were invincible. In the face of constant threat, appearances were everything. This was a world where survival depended on the ability to project strength through ritual, strength through tradition. For the Byzantines, tradition was not just an ancient practice, but a lifeline. The strange customs that we often view as extravagant were often grounded in necessity. The lavish feasts, the ostentatious clothing, the intricate ceremonies, they were not about indulgence. They were about sending a message: we are here, we are strong, and we will endure. Each tradition, no matter how bizarre it may seem today, was a carefully crafted tool in an ongoing struggle for power and stability. But even more peculiar was the role religion played in the survival of the Eastern Empire. Christianity, embraced by Emperor Constantine, became the cornerstone of Byzantine identity. The fusion of Roman law and Christian beliefs created a uniquely Byzantine form of governance that shaped everything from imperial rituals to social customs. The church and the state were not separate but intertwined, each reinforcing the other's power. The emperor, seen as God's representative on earth, was the head of both the political and religious worlds, ensuring that every custom, no matter how strange, had divine approval. As we look deeper into the strange customs of the Byzantine Empire, we begin to understand that they weren't born from luxury or whim. They were born out of necessity. The Byzantines were a people forged by survival, by constant threat, by the desire to protect and maintain an empire at the crossroads of the known world. Their customs were not simply oddities. They were strategies, tools that allowed them to thrive where others failed. And so, the Byzantines found a way to endure, to adapt, to bend and stretch ancient Roman traditions until they fit the needs of a new age. In the next chapter, we will delve into how these traditions evolved over time, giving birth to customs that, though strange to us, made perfect sense to the Byzantines themselves. As the Western Roman Empire crumbled, its remnants became the foundation upon which the Byzantine Empire was built. Yet, the transformation from Rome to Byzantium wasn't simply a matter of moving the capital. It was a profound shift, one that reached into every corner of life, from politics and religion to culture, art, and even fashion. The Byzantines didn't just inherit Rome's legacy, they adapted it, molded it, and infused it with their own vision of power and governance. What emerged was a hybrid world, a world that preserved the grandeur of Rome while simultaneously forging a new identity distinct from the West. The transition was not just political, it was cultural, religious, and social, a slow metamorphosis that unfolded over centuries. The Byzantine Empire, though it arose from the ashes of Rome, was in many ways a reimagining of Roman principles. And nowhere was this more evident than in the courtly life of the emperor, where tradition and transformation came together in a fascinating and sometimes perplexing blend. Roman customs and ceremonies were deeply rooted in tradition, with the emperor playing a central role in both the political and religious spheres. But as the Byzantine Empire evolved, its rulers began to realize that their world was no longer the same as it had been under the mighty Caesars. The Roman world was one of open forums and loud political debates, where senators and citizens alike had a voice. But in Byzantium, the emperor's power became more centralized and absolute. He was no longer just a ruler. He was a divine figure, a living embodiment of God's will on earth. This divine authority transformed not only the emperor's role, but also the very way in which power was expressed and maintained. It was in the Byzantine court that the shift from Rome to Byzantium was most apparent. While Roman emperors had often mingled with their citizens, appeared in public settings, and took part in political discourse, the Byzantine emperor became an almost mythical figure, surrounded by intricate customs designed to reinforce his divinity. The court's elaborate rituals and ceremonies became the backbone of this divine persona. The emperor, dressed in resplendent purple robes, appeared not as a leader among men, but as a sacred figure whose every word and gesture held divine weight. One of the most striking shifts in Byzantine life was the development of court rituals. In Rome, the emperor was often seen as a man of action, a general, a leader in battle, a politician in the Senate. He was accessible, approachable, and part of the daily life of the empire. But in Byzantium, the emperor became an almost mythical figure, surrounded by intricate customs designed to reinforce his divinity. The emperor's throne, placed high above all others, symbolized not only his earthly authority, but his connection to the heavens. His every appearance was a spectacle, filled with rituals and practices meant to awe and humble those who beheld him. Even the simplest actions like the emperor's walk through the streets became symbolic. His procession was not just a journey through the city, it was a divine parade, a visual declaration of the emperor's supremacy. The streets were lined with citizens who would kneel and bow in reverence as the emperor passed by. His very presence was a reminder that the divine and the mortal realms were interconnected, and that he was the bridge between the two. At the heart of these courtly rituals was an understanding that power, in Byzantium, was not simply about military might or political maneuvering. Power was about control over perceptions, about projecting strength through symbolism. Every piece of clothing worn by the emperor, every piece of architecture in the palace, every ritual performed, was designed to reinforce his divine right to rule. In this sense, the Byzantines understood that survival depended not only on military prowess, but on the ability to shape and control how the world saw them. But as strange as these rituals might seem to us today, they were deeply rooted in necessity. The Byzantine Empire was constantly under threat by invaders from the east, by rising powers in the west, and by internal strife. It was a world where the future of the empire often hung in the balance, and the Byzantines knew that maintaining control over their people was as important as defending their borders. These strange customs were not signs of decadence, they were the tools of survival, designed to ensure the empire's strength in the face of constant uncertainty. In addition to the court rituals, the Byzantine Empire also saw a transformation in its approach to governance. Roman law, one of Rome's greatest legacies, was preserved and expanded in Byzantium. The Corpus Juris Civilis, or the body of civil law, created by Emperor Justinian I in the 6th century, became the foundation for much of modern legal systems in Europe. But while the laws themselves were based on Roman principles, the way in which they were applied in Byzantium was distinctly different. The emperor, now seen as the embodiment of divine justice, was also the ultimate arbiter of law. His court was not just a political body, it was a place where religious and political authority converged. The Byzantine court was also a place where customs and practices began to take on an increasingly religious character. With the rise of Christianity as the state religion, the boundaries between the sacred and the secular began to blur. The emperor's role as a political leader was inseparable from his role as a religious figure. The Byzantine Church, while powerful in its own right, supported the emperor's divine right to rule. The emperor's relationship with the church was a symbiotic one, where both church and state worked together to enforce the emperor's authority. As the empire moved away from its Roman roots, it also adopted many practices that were unique to the Byzantine world. The emperor's position became increasingly isolated, with fewer public appearances and a greater emphasis on symbolism and ritual. His divinity was reinforced by the use of icons, religious images that were seen as conduits of divine power. The iconoclast controversy that would later divide the empire was one of the most significant cultural battles of the Byzantine period, as it was tied directly to the role of the emperor and his ability to maintain control over religious and political life. But what made the Byzantines truly unique wasn't just their politics or religion, it was the way they used culture and tradition to shape their world. The Byzantine Empire, though it was born from the ashes of Rome, was not merely a continuation of the past. It was a bold, inventive civilization that blended old and new in ways that would influence the future of Europe, the Middle East, and beyond. The bizarre customs that we often associate with Byzantium, lavish feasts, religious ceremonies, the divine elevation of emperors, were born out of necessity. They were tools designed to maintain an empire that was constantly threatened, constantly adapting, and always seeking to project strength. In the next section, we will explore the role of Byzantine religion in shaping these customs, and how faith became one of the empire's most powerful instruments in ensuring survival. From elaborate church rituals to the blending of political power with divine authority, the Byzantine Empire's religious traditions would become one of its most defining features. As we continue, you'll begin to see just how deeply interconnected religion, power, and survival were in the Byzantine world, and how these traditions set the stage for some of the empire's most mysterious and fascinating customs. The Byzantine emperor was not merely a ruler, he was a living god. At least, that was how the imperial court saw him. The emperor's daily life was an elaborate performance, a constant reassertion of his divine right to rule. and a carefully crafted ritual designed to reinforce the awe and reverence he demanded from his subjects. The Byzantines did not see their emperor as an ordinary man, nor did they want anyone else to. His very existence was a demonstration of divine power, a constant reminder of the connection between the mortal world and the divine. In the Byzantine court, every movement had meaning. The emperor's entrance to the court was no simple affair. When he appeared, it was not just the emperor walking into a room, it was the arrival of a divine figure whose presence signaled the intersection of heaven and earth. The doors to the imperial throne room, typically gilded and imposing, would open, and the emperor would step through, his very steps a spectacle. It wasn't enough for the emperor to simply be present. He had to be seen as a living symbol of God's will on earth. The emperor's attire, for example, was never just clothing. It was a visual proclamation of his power. The elaborate robes, often woven with gold, purple, the color of royalty, and jewels, were far more than simple garments. These were symbols of the emperor's divine status, each thread imbued with meaning. Purple dye, reserved for the emperor alone, was a sacred color, said to be a gift from the gods. To wear it was not only an assertion of status, but a declaration of divine favor. It was believed that to don such garments was to take on the mantle of the heavens themselves, linking the emperor directly to the gods. But the emperor's power didn't just come from what he wore or where he stood. It also came from what he did. Every action, from the way he moved to the gestures he made, was part of a ritualized performance. The emperor would often raise his right hand in a sign of blessing or benediction as he passed by courtiers. This wasn't just a friendly wave. It was a gesture charged with divine authority. The courtiers, bowing in reverence, would kneel, not merely out of respect, but in acknowledgement of the emperor's status as God's earthly representative. His very movement through the court was a reaffirmation of his power, an acknowledgement that his rule was not just political, but spiritual. Yet, behind these grandiose displays of power lay a pragmatic truth. The emperor, in all his ceremonial glory, wasn't just performing for his own ego, he was performing to maintain control. The rituals and ceremonies of the Byzantine court were tools of power. They ensured that the emperor remained not just a political leader, but a living symbol of divine authority. In a world constantly at war, threatened by both internal revolt and external invasion, the emperor had to maintain an aura of invincibility. These elaborate rituals reinforced that invincibility in the eyes of the people. The more awe-inspiring the emperor's entrance, the more the people saw him as untouchable, a figure whose power was unassailable. The Byzantine court wasn't merely a place for the emperor to rule. It was a stage, and he was its lead actor. His every word, gesture, and appearance reinforced the carefully constructed narrative of his divine status. The Byzantines understood that their empire was fragile and that the emperor's authority could easily be challenged. But by weaving religion, spectacle, and politics together, they created a system that helped to preserve the emperor's power. What might seem like eccentric rituals to us were, in reality, a carefully constructed performance designed to keep an empire strong, united, and above all, loyal to its emperor. As we delve deeper into the role of the emperor in the Byzantine court, we begin to understand that these rituals were not simply about luxury or vanity, they were about survival. In a world where the emperor was both the political and divine leader, these daily customs were a form of protection. The next section will explore how the emperor's divinity was reinforced through religion and how the Byzantine court used religious symbolism to maintain its hold over the empire.